everyone. Right now, we're going to get to know Izzy. She lives in the UK and frequently experiences psychosis and delusions that the world is ending. So let's get to know a little bit about Izzy so we can better be her friend. Izzy, thanks for reaching out to share your story. I know it's going to help a lot of people. My first question for you, what do you want the world to know about you?
I guess I want them to know that I live with psychosis and that it's part of me and that it doesn't negate any other part of my personality. It's something that exists within me just as much as everything else does.
How would you define psychosis to a person who's never heard of it?
Psychosis medically usually includes episodic hallucinations and delusions. I have experienced hallucinations occasionally, mainly audio, so like voices, but predominantly for me, psychosis is episodes of really overpowering, overwhelming, intrusive, delusional thoughts that are often really absurd and don't have to have a connection with reality. So for me, those delusions are usually focused around the world ending or me being at risk of harm. So somebody's going to kill me, or a bomb's going to go off. There's just this irresistible sense of danger that's occurring to me right in this moment. Not necessarily now, but when I'm having an episode, and my brain is coming up with these really absurd explanations as to why I'm feeling that danger.
Is psychosis a diagnosis within itself, or is it a symptom of something greater?
On my, a record, on my letters with the psychiatrist that I'm under, they have written schizophrenia down, but psychosis is the thing more commonly referred to, and it's definitely the thing that I feel describes my situation more because of the episodic nature and because I don't have some of the other symptoms that schizophrenics are typically thought to have. So for me, psychosis is probably what I identify more.
How long do your periods of psychosis typically last?
It depends. So at the start of 2020, for the first, I would say 3 to 4 months, the episodes were pretty constant and I was never really out of them. Those thoughts were sort of always there to greater or lesser degrees. I'd say now an episode happens on average once a week, but they can be set off by things. So I have to be really careful about what news I read.
Did you always experience these symptoms, or was it something that more developed over the last few years?
Prior to 2020, I had certain irrational beliefs in the sense of, like I said, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was awful. I thought I was inherently evil, or that in public, I think people were laughing about me. And so those sort of irrational beliefs were there, but they didn't quite have the immediacy and the intrusiveness that they did post 2020.
How did your delusions change at the start of 2020?
I have really no recollection of the first few months of 2020 because I was so out of it. And so in a way, I'm grateful because I don't have memories of how awful it was. I only have what people told me. But at the same time, I would have liked to perhaps feel a little bit more in touch in what was going on then so that I could understand it a little bit more.
Do you have any memories from that time period?
So I think the one sort of memory there's two memories that stand out for me, and they stand out for different reasons. The first one was we went to a friend's house to play board games. Just a really normal night, nothing too risky, nothing too dangerous, just board games. And all of a sudden I became convinced that the person's house who we were at, they were trying to kill me. There was something wrong with the house. There was ghosts in the house. They had this, I don't know if it was a heater or an air fan, but some sort of like electrical device that was on and it was making a noise. And my brain went, this thing is going to explode. You have to get out the house right now. And I literally ran out the house. They had to come after me. They had to get me in the car and drive me home. That for me was the moment that I those beliefs started to solidify. That was sort of the moment where the balance tipped and those beliefs started to become more pervasive, more long lasting. And then the other moment, which demonstrates how out of touch with reality I was my partner found me trying to escape the house in my pajamas, in a cardigan, without shoes, and I was carrying a box. And this was a box with a key that I had managed to lock. And I wouldn't let him look at it. And, time passed and eventually the box was opened. And in this box was my passport, my swimming badges from when I was about 11 years old, a plastic yellow fork, a single Gaviscon, which is like a stomach acid tablet, and just really random things that made no sense. There was no reason why I should have had this box and put all of these random items in that have no meaning at all together, and to have been so protective over the box to try and leave the house with it, to try and escape. And for me, that was the moment when I was like, there's really something wrong here. We need help. We need an intervention. I need some sort of care.
When you share those stories now, it's pretty easy to see that your behavior was irrational back then. But while it's happening, does it feel irrational?
Right, exactly. So like right now, although they don't ever truly go away, the background noise is sort of always there. And so even though I'm saying it now and I have that awareness of it being sort of very irrational, there's still part of my brain that as I say it goes, but that is going to happen. But yeah, you're right. It's that sense of right now I can sort of distance myself and look outside and go, obviously there isn't a flood, no flood is going to happen right now. But in the moment, your brain is just, you can't escape that. Nobody can tell you otherwise, and you can't think your way out of it. Like I said, I was a philosophy student. As a philosophy student, we're taught to think critically and evaluate what we think. And none of those skills are useful, because once that mindset of the delusion is there and that immediacy and that danger, there is nothing I can do but wait it out, basically, until it passes, until it subsides.
How do you hope others react when you're in a state of psychosis?
Oh, that's difficult. That's really difficult, actually. So if I'm in public and people don't know me, I would like them just not to stare. And if I'm on my own and I'm not with anyone, I would like for people to just ask if I'm okay. I think the worst thing you can do is try and tell me that whatever I'm believing is false, right? Because then I think that you're part of it, whatever delusion is going on. So it's very easy for me to switch from a point of trusting you to all of a sudden believing you're part of the delusion. And I know my partner, because it was a learning process for him to learn how to sort of deal with my episodes. At the very start, sometimes his immediate reaction, which makes total sense, would be to say, the world isn't ending, or a bomb isn't in the house, or nobody's following you, right? Because that's just the normal immediate reaction to say to somebody who's saying something obviously false. But then what my brain does in that moment is it goes, you're trying to convince me this isn't real, which means you're putting me in danger, which means you're part of the problem. You're part of this grand game to hurt me or to test me, or you're the person who knows where the bomb is or whatever. So just be patient. Don't try and say the thing that I'm believing isn't false, because in that moment it's not going to work. It's not going to help. Just try and get me to a safe place, a quiet place, whether that's outside, whether that's my house, a quiet room. Try and get me watching something on my phone. So although I can't stop the delusions, what I've found helpful is watching something that demands my attention, but isn't too hard, isn't too complicated. So getting me to watch something, or getting me, my Nintendo Switch, just try and distract me. It might not work, it probably doesn't work, but just being there and just being patient with me and just letting me know that you're there for me, I think is enough.
Has the past few years and dealing with these heightened symptoms given you any kind of insight into the human psyche that perhaps you didn't have before?
We don't realize how fragile we perhaps are, and how actually the insecurities that we have and that we all have, how easily they can go from being a little voice in your head to all of a sudden being a really disruptive influence in your life. I think, for people who perhaps don't have a really severe mental illness, it's almost very easy to see you as somebody who doesn't have an illness, and the people who do are in this entirely different category, and you're just not one of those people. But for me, what having psychosis has made me realize is that it's not like that. There's no clear line between people who are mentally ill and people who aren't. We're all somewhere on that journey, and we all have some insecurities. And so in that sense, it's taught me just how much we need to validate other people's feelings and be kind to people, and not sort of underestimate the effect that what you do or what you say can have on somebody else.
So it sounds like unfiltered access to a cell phone could really be a dangerous thing for you.
Exactly. So, I don't have any news apps on my phone. Me and my partner have an agreement that if there is ever anything in the news that I really need to know, he will tell me. So, for example, if the UK goes into another lockdown, he'll tell me that. I don't need to seek out the news for myself. And so that sort of frees up that space and allows me to have that safety. Social media is a bit of a difficult one, because they can be a bit of a hotbed for conspiracy theorists, and reading about them can set me off because they usually are the same sort of things that I believe when I'm having an episode of psychosis. For example, I remember getting stuck in a Twitter rabbit hole, like you said, a rabbit hole about how the world had ended in 2012. And then everything since then has just been this massive simulation. And I got stuck in Twitter and just going through threads and threads and threads. And I couldn't take my attention away because it set me off. It had put me in an episode.
How would you describe what it feels like to enter a state of psychosis that's triggered by one of these news stories?
It's indescribable because I can't focus on anything else. When I am having an episode, there is nothing you can do. You sort of just have to ride that roller coaster. And so I can't do anything, and they can last for hours. And I don't always know when they're going to happen. So although I have learned how and to at least reduce my triggers, if you like, sometimes they'll come out of nowhere. Sometimes an episode will just happen and I just have to deal with it. I just have to roll with it. And usually that involves sitting in a bathroom, shaking, not being able to breathe, and just riding it out, sitting with those thoughts, and just trying to contain my behavior more than anything. So trying to not be a risk to myself, trying to not act upon the delusions, if you like.
What's the difference between a skeptic who's somewhat entertained with conspiracy theories and likes to keep up with them, and a person who can read the same type of information and enter a state of psychosis?
So it's interesting that you asked me this, because I did an undergraduate degree in philosophy, and as part of my final year research project, I basically asked this question. I asked, essentially what you're asking is, what are the difference between people who just believe conspiracy theories versus my psychosis, which might actually be the same content, have the same content as those conspiracy theories? And I don't have an answer really, because I think the difference is nuanced and perhaps not as clear cut as we think. And actually I think that sometimes conspiracy theorists might share in some of the aspects that I do, but I would say overarching, the biggest difference is that usually psychosis is going to be more disruptive to your life. So conspiracy theorists or people who are skeptical of the news, they might still be able to go to work as normal, and they won't feel necessarily really distressed when they're having those beliefs and when they're endorsing those beliefs, and it might not affect their relationships and their everyday life. And so I think if I had to give an answer, for me it would be, just the disruption that it has in your ability to function and your everyday life.
How would you define delusions?
So no definition of delusion is ever going to work perfectly, but I think for me what fits best with my experience of how I am able to distinguish between what is a belief that I genuinely have and what is me having a delusion. For me, delusions are usually absurd, but not necessarily in their content, but in their immediacy, right? So it's true that the climate crisis is really imminent, but it's not true that the climate crisis is going to arrive tomorrow. Also, the extent to which it brings me distress. So, you know, the normal beliefs that I have about climate change, they're distressing to me, but they don't stop me going about my everyday life, right? Actually, they motivate me to do things. They motivate me to take the bus instead of driving, whereas delusions are disruptive and they motivate me to stay inside and things like pack my bags because a flood is going to happen right now, even though it isn't. There's actually no risk right now of any floods, but I've had occasions where I've had a delusion of a flood is going to happen and my brain goes, you have to pack your bags right now because you're in danger and you're going to have to leave your house. So yeah, for me, the distinction is that delusions are usually more disruptive, more intrusive, and they have that sense of immediacy of you are in danger now.
Does the current state of the news system throughout the world heighten your symptoms?
Yeah, exactly. Like, again, part of my education as a philosophy student was being able to think critically and evaluate beliefs, but when you don't know where the information is coming from and you don't know the interests, who's telling me this information, who's giving me this information, and what do they want from me, and why are they giving me that information? And I think being in that current climate where this is true and we have things like fake news, again, feeds into my symptoms, because it's almost like, well, I have reason not to trust what people are saying to me, and I have reason not to trust what I'm seeing on the internet, because we know that. And so it is really hard to find that balance in my life between being critical of what I am seeing on the news without letting that skepticism consume me so much that I become really ill again.
Does having psychosis impact the way that others see you?
Yeah, I definitely think there's this sense in which, because they know, at least the people that do know within my life, that I have this diagnosis, sometimes I feel like things I say are perhaps a little bit undermined because there's this assumption that I'm irrational. So, for example, I really care about climate change, and in my everyday life, I try and really take steps to, address that in a way that I can. And sometimes I think that when I have conversations with people about climate change that also know about my diagnosis, it can come across a bit like I'm a sort of, a doomsday, the world is ending and it's just part of my illness, rather than because I actually do believe those things.
You seem to just really understand yourself. How did you get to this place of understanding? When did you first seek help?
It was that moment where those two stories that I mentioned earlier, so the becoming convinced that my friend was trying to kill me and trying to escape with a box full of completely unrelated things, those two moments made me, my partner, and his wonderful parents basically go, something's wrong, this is not normal, we need to get help, it's gone too far, this is something we can't manage on our own, we need some sort of help. And so we basically reached out to a private psychiatrist, a private psychological hospital unit, if you like, and they sort of were able to help us. So they put me on some antipsychotics, which sort of helped with the symptoms, helped the management. And then I started seeing a psychologist, and I was seeing him pretty much every week for most of 2020.
How did working with a psychologist benefit you?
I think I needed somebody to help me understand myself, to sort of guide me to the answers without giving them to me, to enable them to enable me to find those answers within myself, and help me understand why perhaps I was having these episodes, why perhaps it was that I was feeling so unsafe and that unsafe feeling was leading to these really absurd beliefs. He also taught me how to help manage them. So he was the first person to say to me, you know, you can't think your way out of these things when you're having these, you know, these episodes. You can't start reasoning with yourself because your body's in fight or flight mode, your body's in panic mode, your body isn't in a position to listen to your challenges or to anybody else's challenges about the belief yourself. You have to deal with almost the physiological aspects. So get really, really, really silly and obvious things like getting some fresh air. So when I'm in an episode, my body temperature just skyrockets because my nervous system is just going a million miles an hour. So sometimes having that little bit of cool air, it doesn't stop the episode, but it can just take that edge off a little bit. Things like taking deep breaths. Again, when I start having an episode, I feel like I can't breathe because I'm hyperventilating. So if somebody can help me with the breathing a little bit, again, it just takes the edge off a little bit. So for me, the therapist was helpful because he showed me a different way of looking at it. He showed me how to live with it, and he helped me find answers within myself that I'd perhaps been searching for a long time.
Do the tools you've learned working with a psychologist help you when you're in a state of psychosis?
No, not really, which is really frustrating because I feel like I do all this work both as an academic in my research projects and both with my psychologist, which is still ongoing work. And then sometimes it can feel like when you're having an episode, it can feel so exacerbating because you're like, where is all this understanding gone? I know why I'm feeling this. I know why this episode is happening. I know what I have to do to manage it. And sometimes it just feels like, all that work was for nothing. But I think although that understanding feels like it's doing no work in the moment when you're having the episode, I think it's doing the work in the time when you're not having the episodes. So whereas previously, if I had an episode, it might take me a week to recover and I might not leave the house for a week and it might be really disruptive. Because of this increased understanding that I have, I'm able to sort of get back on my feet and get back to a little sense of normality a bit quicker than I would. So the understanding does the work, just not in the moment when you're having that panic.
So would it be correct to say that what you've learned helps you to recover quicker from an episode?
Not on its own. The understanding on its own doesn't, but the understanding and the application of that understanding to self-compassion and self-kindness definitely does. So it's not enough to just go, I have these episodes because I feel unsafe because X, Y, and Z. You have to actually be kind to yourself and go, you know, I forgive myself. I am going to allow myself to feel this because I understand why it's happening. And so it's the understanding coupled with applying that to being kind to yourself and forgiving yourself that I think helps reduce the frequency of those episodes.
If a person who's watching this video sees a person who's experiencing psychosis, what do you hope they think?
I hope that they see that person as having some strength, and rather than seeing them as somebody who might be a risk to that person who's seeing the person with the delusions, seeing that as somebody who could be a potential friend, or seeing that as somebody who could enhance your own understanding. You know, we all have different roles to play in each other's lives, and so for me, if you know somebody who's experiencing delusions, I just want you to think of them as somebody who is the same as anybody else. They just might need a little bit of support in that moment.